Quantity competition, everyone takes everyone else's quantities as given. Price depends on the sum of the quantities, and profits are the product of markup and quantity. Under Cournot collaboration, everyone takes everyone else's prices, or equivalently markups, as given. Quantity depends on the sum of the prices, or equivalently markups. Profits are the product of markup and quantity, right? So those things are exactly the reverse of one another. So if you just interchange prices and markups, you get the same problem. So any result in the Cournot model applies here except reversed. And that means that firms are hurt by others raising their price rather than raising their quantity. The prices are too high rather than the quantities are being too high from the firm's perspectives, right? And the basic idea is that everyone is scrambling for a piece of the pie rather than growing the total pie. And so a merger would actually lead to a lower total price. And this is the reason why policy is usually different towards what are called vertical mergers than towards what are called horizontal mergers. Vertical mergers are mergers between firms that supply to each other or that produce complementary goods. It's called vertical because when one firm sells to another firm, that's considered a vertical relationship, right? This is also true of policy towards complementary patents, right? That if two firms sell the same, sell products that are complementary with each other, if they have patents on goods that are complementary with each other, then it's usually viewed as a good thing when they pool those together and sell them or license them as a group. Okay, so what, Charlie, is Charlie here? No. Does anyone else want to say what the reverse of Cournot's theorem would be here? Yeah, Connor.
Would it be that as n increases, the markup gets larger and larger?
And
the quantity provided decreases?
Yeah, exactly. That in fact, the whole market disappears, right? So they get larger and larger, but in particular, we said under Cournot competition, everything converged down to cost, to efficiency. Here, that converges to not existing at all, right? So this is sort of a very pessimistic conclusion. Because of all these layers of monopoly on top of one another, the market shuts down. This is very closely related to the notion of the tragedy of the commons, and I want to relate it to that. So imagine that there are a bunch of individuals who can make costly contributions to a charity, AI, and the value that each individual gets from the contributions to charity depends only on the total amount that's contributed. Capital A, the sum of the little AIs. Now, let's imagine everyone gets some value out of the charity, right? Now, the value to each individual is the value they get minus the cost to them, whereas the value to society is the sum of all the individual values minus the total cost, right? And the basic problem here is that contributions to charity bring this total value, capital V prime, to society, but each individual only gets little vi, right? Now imagine that everyone's symmetric. What that says is that if each individual is optimizing, they're going to set capital V prime over n, that's their fraction of the total, equal to 1, the marginal cost of contributing. Whereas society would prefer that capital V prime is set equal to 1, which means that if V prime is if V is concave, so V prime is decreasing, there's going to be sort of like 1 over n too little provided under a decentralized situation, right? And this gives you the same result as Cournot in the two cases. Everyone is going to free ride on everybody else contributing. Just as in the collaboration problem, everyone was hoping that everyone else would set a lower price and that they could reap the benefits of that, right? So this is the collective action problem. It says that in a large population with voluntary contribution, public goods, goods that benefit everyone, but each person individually needs to pay for, will be arbitrarily underprovided as the number of people gets large, right? And this is the reason why we said that concentrated interests will tend to be much better represented in politics than will be diffuse interests. Because diffuse interests, every individual gains from lobbying in favor of that. but they only gain a small part. Where if interests are concentrated, each individual gets a larger part of the gains from contributing. Okay. So, what conditions exactly make something a public good like this, Clemence?
Has to be non-rival.
What does that mean?
That means that if I use a good, someone else can use it at the same time.
Yeah.
Non-excludable.
Yeah.
Which means that my benefits won't hurt the other's benefits. Like everything
That's the same as non-rival, but sorry, what's?
Like I won't exclude people to use that.
Go on.
Like everybody will receive something amazing. Everybody can use it.
That's non-rival still. Non-excludable is something a little different. Think, what does the word exclude mean?
So like, not like someone use it.
Yeah. So that means that you can't keep someone from using the thing. So non-rival means that someone using it doesn't hurt anyone else. Non-excludable means that there's no way to stop anyone from using it. Everyone automatically gets access to it. Okay. So non-rival is in some ways the most important. It says that one person's benefit from receiving benefits does not preclude others from receiving benefit. Therefore, there's zero marginal cost of supplying to other people. The secondary one is non-excludability, which says everyone gets the benefit regardless. There's no way to exclude or charge people for it. Examples that fail the first condition are called congestible public goods, and the second condition are called excludable public goods. So for example, intellectual property could be considered a public good because there's no cost of sharing it with other people, or an idea is sort of like a public good. And then the key question is it excludable or not? Well, prior to the modern age, it was pretty easy to exclude people from using music, right? It was hard to make copies of things, only the record company could, whatever. But nowadays, it's almost impossible to exclude people from file sharing, right? And that makes it into much more of a pure public good rather than an excludable public good, right? So in fact, these things are really a continuum. The real question is how costly is it to try to exclude someone, not whether it's possible at all, right? Another important issue in dealing with public goods, which I'm not going to have time to talk about today, which really is what makes IP different from public goods that we're going to be talking about today, has to do with who knows whether it's worth creating this thing or not. In IP, we sort of thought there was this entrepreneur, he had an idea, he could figure out whether it was worth creating this thing. In fact, he had the whole idea, no one would have even thought of it without him. Whereas public goods are more like a project that's proposed, and we all have some ideas about whether it's a good project or not, and so we have to decide on it together, right? Okay, so what are some classic examples of pure public goods? Does anyone want to give an example? How about Ryan?
Like something that you can't exclude from anyone would be like national defense, because if you have army, everyone will be protected, and you can't say that if someone attacks your house, it will protect you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like in order to protect the country, you have to sort of protect all the borders of it, right? And it's not like one person won't get that benefit, right? Environmental services, like the weather, right? Things that we do to like affect the climate will automatically impact everyone. The existence value of goods or charities are another example. Ideas. It's basically impossible to exclude anyone from using an idea, and one person using it doesn't stop another person from using it, right? What are examples of congestible public goods? Matt, Klein?
Sure. So congestible means that it's not non-rival.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, good public education.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go to a really good high school, then it means that someone else can't go to that really good high school at the same time and does benefit from it.
But that's excludable too, right? So that's more of a private good. The question is, can you think of something that's non-excludable but is rival?
Well, okay, so then the example of tragedy commons is pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like a public pool resource, right? So like infrastructure is often like that. It's often hard to keep someone from using a bridge or a road, even though it is obviously congestible, right? Amenities like lakes and parks can get full of people, but it's hard to keep anyone out of them. Jackson, what are some excludable public goods?
So excludable are going to be goods that are non-rival,
Yeah,
but you can keep people out. So,
yeah.
is that going to be like the IP thing we were just talking about?
Yeah, that's a good example. IP. Another example of this is land reform. So what's land reform? Imagine that there's a big landowner, and living on his territory are a bunch of different tenant farmers, right? People who who farm little parcels of land. Now, if you break up that big estate, it makes sense to give those parcels out to the people who know how to farm that land, the people who are living there, right? And that's usually what happens under land reform. So it's sort of a public good because each one of those farmers, they might like to get the other farmer's land, but pretty much they know their parcel, they want their parcel, they don't want the other guy's land. So everyone enjoying the land that gets broken up is pretty non-rival. However, it is excludable. You could just kick someone off the land when you do this. You don't have to leave them there, right? The government could just remove them from that land, in which case it becomes excludable, right? Okay. So these are public goods, but there are other things which are public bads, which are, I think, at least as important. So public bads are things that bring diffuse harms rather than benefits. One example of that would be land takings. When the government comes and tries to build a bridge or a research facility, they need to get together a bunch of parcels of land, right? Just getting together one of those parcels doesn't do them any good, right? So they need to put together all this land to assemble it. And that requires inflicting harm on all the people who are currently living on that land. So that's a public bad, right? Corporate acquisitions are similar. If someone wants to buy a company, all the people who are currently owning that company are going to lose the access to their shares. Debt settlements are another example. If a bunch of people own the debt of a company and you want to keep that company from going through bankruptcy, you need to make a settlement that takes away the rights to control and liquidate that company from all of the people who currently have it. The FCC has been trying to reassemble spectrum. Spectrum is currently owned by different TV companies, and you need contiguous blocks of spectrum to put in LTE and 4G technologies. And so you need to get a bunch of those people to all agree to give up their land. And I've worked a little bit on that. The patent pool problem is another example of this. Imagine we want to avoid the multi-marginalization problem from firms that have complementary patents all doing this, right? Well, then you want to form a patent pool. As we said, we want them all to merge. But imagine that you're one member of that patent pool, right? You could say, hey, why don't you guys all form a patent pool? Go and reduce your prices. And I'll still hold out and charge a really high price as the only other guy, and then I'll get half the profits. And you guys all can take the other half, right? So that's another sort of public bad problem. In order to assemble a pool, you need to sort of force everyone to buy in. Another problem are polluting projects. Imagine that we're going to build a factory and it's going to pollute a whole big area. That's going to bring a harm to all the people in that area, right? Now, these aren't that different from externalities in some ways. But again, the fundamental problem versus the externalities is we think it's really important here that the victims know something about whether it's efficient to create this thing or not. Like the people who currently own their houses know how valuable it is for them to stay in their houses, right? So the collective action problem applies in this context as well, except it becomes what's called the holdout problem, which is that every individual person is going to claim that their property is worth a huge amount to them if they have to voluntarily agree to sell in order to hold out to get a part of what everybody else would gain, right? And that's basically the equivalent